Sarah Martinez had seen enough hardship in her 32 years to know when something felt wrong. As she stepped out of the cramped van that had brought her and 5 other caretakers to the remote Carpathian castle, every instinct screamed danger. But with 8-year-old Emma waiting at home and medical bills piling up from her daughter's recent surgery, Sarah couldn't afford to listen to her gut this time. The ancient stone fortress loomed against the stormy October sky, its Gothic towers piercing the clouds like accusing fingers. Ravens circled overhead, their harsh cries echoing off the weathered walls. The other caretakers huddled together, whispering nervously as they gathered their belongings. "This place gives me the creeps," muttered James Chen, a former hospital orderly from Seattle. At 25, he was the youngest of the group, having taken the job to pay off student loans. His hands trembled as he shouldered his duffel bag. Rebecca Williams, a seasoned caregiver from Alabama, tried to maintain her usual optimism. "Now, don't you all start with that nonsense. It's just an old building that needs some love and attention." But even she couldn't hide the uncertainty in her voice as she stared up at the towering walls. Maria Rodriguez crossed herself discreetly. The devout Catholic from Arizona had raised 4 children as a single mother before they grew up and moved away. This job was supposed to be her chance at a fresh start, but the oppressive atmosphere made her rosary beads feel heavy in her pocket. David Thompson, a burly man from Colorado with 20 years of nursing experience, stepped forward confidently. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to do a job. The agency briefed us. We're caring for an elderly gentleman who rarely leaves his quarters. The pay is exceptional because the location is remote and the work is demanding. That's all there is to it." The 6th member of their group, Elena Petrova, remained silent. The pale Romanian woman had worked in similar establishments before, and her dark eyes held secrets she wasn't willing to share. She understood more about their destination than she let on, having grown up hearing whispered stories about the Draco family and their ancient stronghold. A tall, gaunt man emerged from the castle's massive oak doors. His black butler's uniform was impeccably tailored, but his skin had a waxy, unnatural pallor. "Welcome," he said in accented English, his voice carrying an odd formality. "I am Victor, the estate manager. Lord Draco is expecting you." Sarah studied Victor's face as he spoke, noting how he avoided direct eye contact and how his movements seemed eerily fluid. Her experience as a nurse had taught her to read people quickly, and everything about this man set off alarm bells. The group followed Victor through corridors lined with ancient tapestries and oil paintings of stern-faced aristocrats. Candles provided the only light, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, incense, and something else Sarah couldn't identify, something metallic and unpleasant. "Your employer requests that you maintain absolute silence during daylight hours," Victor explained as they walked. "Lord Draco suffers from a rare condition that makes him extremely sensitive to light and sound. He sleeps deeply during the day and is most active at night." "What kind of care does he require?" Sarah asked, her nursing instincts kicking in despite her unease. Victor paused at a heavy wooden door. "You will learn soon enough. For now, you must rest. Your duties begin at sunset." He handed each of them an old-fashioned key. "Your rooms are on this floor. Dinner will be served at 7. Do not venture into the east wing or the tower stairs. Those areas are unsafe." Sarah's room was spartanly furnished but clean, with a narrow bed, a wooden desk, and a small fireplace. A single window looked out over the misty valley below. She unpacked her few belongings, including a framed photo of Emma smiling gap-toothed at the camera. The little girl's cancer was in remission, but the treatments had been expensive, and Sarah's insurance hadn't covered everything. As evening approached, the castle seemed to come alive with subtle sounds, footsteps in distant corridors, doors opening and closing, and a low humming that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Sarah tried to call Emma on her cell phone, but there was no signal. The isolation was complete. At dinner, the caretakers gathered in a drafty dining hall where Victor served them a surprisingly elaborate meal of roasted meats, fresh bread, and rich wine. The food was delicious, but Sarah noticed that Victor never ate with them, and she caught him watching them with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "So when do we meet our patient?" David asked between bites of venison. "Lord Drackle will summon you when he is ready," Victor replied. "Until then, you will take turns maintaining watch during the night hours. The schedule is posted in your rooms." Rebecca laughed nervously. "Didn't sounds mysterious. Is he really that reclusive?" Victor's expression remained unchanged. "Lord Dracul values his privacy above all else. You would be wise to respect his wishes." His pale eyes lingered on each of them in turn, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Sarah tried to read, but she couldn't concentrate. The wind howled through the valley, and somewhere in the castle she could swear she heard music. A haunting melody played on what sounded like a harpsichord. At 11:30, she made her way to the main hall where the others were already assembled. Victor appeared silently, as if materializing from the shadows. He led them through a maze of corridors to a circular chamber dominated by a massive fireplace. Ancient books lined the walls, and strange symbols were carved into the stone archways. "You will wait here," Victor instructed. "Lord Drackle will join you shortly." He glided away, leaving them alone in the flickering candlelight. James paced nervously near the fire. "This is insane. What kind of patient needs 6 caretakers?" "Maybe he's violent," Maria suggested quietly. "My cousin worked with dementia patients who became aggressive at night." "You do not understand where you are," she said in her thick accent. "This place, it has a history. The Drackle family has lived here for centuries." "Doctor, what kind of history?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Before Elena could answer, the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. The candle flames flickered and dimmed, and a presence seemed to fill the chamber, something ancient and powerful that made the air itself feel heavy. The caretakers instinctively moved closer together as footsteps echoed from the corridor. The oak door swung open with a prolonged creak, and their employer entered. Lord Alexandru Drakel was tall and pale, with sharp features that seemed carved from marble. His dark hair was streaked with silver, and his piercing blue eyes held depths that spoke of centuries rather than decades. He wore an elegant black coat that looked like it belonged in another era, and he moved with the fluid grace of a predator. "Welcome to my home," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that was difficult to place. "I trust Victor has explained the unique nature of your employment here." Sarah found herself staring despite her better judgment. There was something magnetic about the man, something that drew the eye and held it captive. But underneath his aristocratic charm, she sensed something dangerous. A barely contained hunger that made her maternal instincts scream warnings. "We're here to help however we can," David said, stepping forward with professional confidence. "What kind of medical condition are we dealing with?" Lord Dracul smiled, revealing teeth that seemed unusually sharp in the candlelight. "I suffer from a rare blood disorder that requires specialized care. You will each take turns assisting me with my treatments." "Blood disorder?" Sarah's nursing background made her naturally curious about medical conditions. "What type? Hemophilia? Anemia?" The nobleman's smile widened. "Something far more ancient and incurable, I'm afraid, but your knowledge and skills will be invaluable." He moved around the group like a general inspecting troops, stopping briefly in front of each caretaker. When he reached Sarah, his cold blue eyes seemed to peer directly into her soul. "You have strength," he observed, "and desperation. A powerful combination?" "I have responsibilities," Sarah replied firmly, meeting his gaze despite the fear crawling up her throat. "I'm here to do a job, nothing more. Shall we begin?" What happened next would haunt Sarah's dreams for years to come. Lord Drackle led them to an adjoining chamber that looked more like a medieval laboratory than a medical facility. Ancient apparatus lined the walls, glass tubes, copper distillation equipment, and books bound in leather that looked suspiciously like skin. "James," the nobleman said softly, "you will assist me first. What do you need me to do?" Lord Dracul's hand shot out with inhuman speed, grasping James by the throat. The caretaker's eyes widened in shock as he was lifted off his feet effortlessly. "I need you to remain very still," the vampire said, his voice never losing its cultured tone. What followed was a nightmare of screams, blood, and inhuman hunger. The other caretakers tried to run, but Victor and 2 other pale servants had appeared to block the exits. One by one, they fell victim to the ancient evil that had lured them to this remote castle. All except Sarah. When Lord Dracul turned to her, expecting the same terror and submission he'd seen in the others, he found something unexpected. Sarah stood her ground, her jaw set with determination, her eyes blazing with protective fury. In her mind, she saw Emma's face, her daughter who needed her to come home, who depended on her strength and courage. "You will not touch me," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the horror surrounding her. The vampire paused, intrigued by her defiance. Around them, the other caretakers lay unconscious, or worse, their life force drained to feed his centuries-old hunger. But this woman, this single mother with calloused hands and fire in her eyes, stood before him like a lioness protecting her cubs. "Fascinating," Lord Dracul murmured, circling her slowly. "You do not beg. You do not weep. Why?" Sarah's hand moved instinctively to the small silver cross at her throat. "A gift from Emma on her last birthday. Because I have something more important than my own life to protect, and I'll be damned if I let some monster in a fancy coat keep me from getting home to my daughter." The vampire's eyes narrowed. He had encountered courage before, even defiance. But this was different. This was a mother's love transformed into an unbreakable shield, and for the first time in centuries, Alexandru Dracul found himself genuinely intrigued rather than simply hungry. "Your daughter," he said thoughtfully. "Tell me about her." Sarah's expression softened slightly, though she never relaxed her defensive stance. "Emma, she's 8. She just beat cancer, and she needs her mom to come home." Her voice hardened again. "So whatever game you're playing, whatever sick fantasy this is, you picked the wrong woman." The nobleman studied her for a long moment, then did something that surprised even himself. He stepped back. Around them, Victor and the other servants stirred restlessly, confused by their master's hesitation. "Put the others in the holding cells," Lord Dracul commanded without taking his eyes off Sarah. This one stays with me." As Sarah was led away to a luxurious but locked chamber high in the castle's main tower, she had no way of knowing that her defiance had accomplished something unprecedented. For the first time in over 400 years, the vampire king of the Carpathians had found himself genuinely curious about a human being. But curiosity, as Sarah would soon learn, could be far more dangerous than simple hunger. Sarah woke to the sound of rain against tall windows, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The chamber she'd been brought to was unlike anything she'd expected, richly appointed with Persian rugs, antique furniture, and walls lined with leather-bound books. A fire crackled warmly in an ornate fireplace, and breakfast waited on a silver tray beside her bed. Real china, real silver, real crystal. Even the nightgown she'd been changed into was silk, though she had no memory of changing clothes. The realization that someone had undressed her while she slept sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the mountain air. She moved to the window and looked out over the misty valley. Far below, she could see a small village nestled among the hills, smoke rising from chimneys like distant prayers. Freedom seemed impossibly far away. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, having little choice in the matter. Victor entered carrying fresh clothes, simple but well-made garments that looked like they'd fit perfectly. "Lord Dracul requests your presence in the library at sunset," he announced in his formal manner. "What happened to the others?" Sarah demanded. "Are they alive?" Victor's expression remained neutral. "They are resting. You need not concern yourself with their welfare. I'm a nurse. Concern for others' welfare is literally my job." Sarah's voice carried the authority she'd learned working in emergency rooms. "I want to see them." "That is not possible." "Why not?" "Because Lord Dracul has claimed you for himself," Victor said simply, as if discussing the weather. "Your companions serve other purposes now." The implications of his words made Sarah's stomach clench, but she forced herself to remain calm. Panic wouldn't help Emma, and getting home to her daughter was the only thing that mattered now. After Victor left, Sarah examined her prison more carefully. The door was locked, naturally, but the windows were too high for escape and faced a sheer drop. However, years of caring for difficult patients had taught her to be observant and resourceful. The fireplace tools might serve as weapons. The heavy candlesticks could be used to break glass or defend herself. And most importantly, the books lining the walls might contain information about her captor and his weaknesses. She spent the day reading, taking breaks only to eat and rest. Many of the volumes were in languages she couldn't understand, but others revealed disturbing information about the Dracul family history. Tales of bloodshed, supernatural abilities, and an ancient curse that had transformed the noble lineage into something monstrous. One particular journal, written in faded English by what appeared to be a Victorian-era scholar, detailed encounters with the current Lord Dracul. The author described him as a creature of immense power and subtle intelligence, capable of great charm and terrible cruelty in equal measure. The scholar had apparently spent months studying the vampire's behavior and had concluded that Dracul's greatest weakness was his profound loneliness. Centuries of isolation that had left him starving for genuine connection even more than blood. As sunset approached, Sarah prepared herself mentally for whatever was to come. She tucked a small silver letter opener into her sleeve and practiced looking calm while her heart raced. When Victor arrived to escort her, she followed him through the castle's winding corridors with outward composure. The library was magnificent. A two-storied chamber with soaring ceilings and thousands of volumes reaching toward ornate moldings. Lord Dracul stood before the fireplace, having exchanged his formal coat for a simple white shirt and dark trousers. In the warm light, he looked almost human, almost normal. "Ah, Sarah," he said without turning around. "I trust you slept well?" "As well as anyone can sleep in a prison," she replied honestly. He turned to face her, a slight smile playing at his lips. "You continue to surprise me. Most humans in your position would be pleading or weeping by now." "I'm not most humans." Sarah moved closer to the fire, using the excuse of warmth to position herself near the iron poker. "I'm a mother. We don't have the luxury of falling apart when our children need us." "Tell me about Emma," he said, settling into a leather armchair and gesturing for her to take the seat opposite. "What kind of child inspires such fierce devotion?" Sarah remained standing. "Why do you care? I find myself curious about the source of your strength." Despite every instinct screaming at her to remain silent, Sarah found herself talking. Perhaps it was the calculated charm in his voice, or perhaps it was simply the desperate need to connect Emma's name with something good in this nightmare. "She's brilliant," Sarah began slowly, always asking questions, always wanting to understand how things work. When she was diagnosed with leukemia last year, she researched her own condition online and corrected her doctor's explanation of the treatment protocol. A genuine smile crossed her face. She wants to be a doctor someday to help other kids who get sick. And her father? Gone, since before she was born. Sarah's voice hardened. "Some men can't handle responsibility. Emma and I are better off without him." Lord Dracul leaned forward, his pale eyes intent. "So you raised her alone. Worked, sacrificed, devoted your entire existence to her well-being. That's what mothers do." "Not all mothers." His voice carried a weight of centuries, of experiences she couldn't begin to imagine. "I had a mother once. She sold me to a Turkish sultan when I was barely 12 years old, in exchange for gold and political favor." Sarah felt a flicker of unexpected sympathy before crushing it ruthlessly. "That doesn't excuse what you've become. It does not. But it perhaps explains why I find your devotion so fascinating." "Yes." He rose and moved to the windows, gazing out at the darkening sky. "I have lived for over 400 years, Sarah. I have seen empires rise and fall, witnessed humanity's greatest triumphs and most appalling cruelties. In all that time, I have never encountered anything as powerful as a mother's love for her child. If you understand that, then you understand why I'll never stop fighting to get back to her. Yes, he said softly. I believe you would walk through hellfire itself if it meant protecting that little girl. He turned back to face her, and Sarah was startled to see something almost vulnerable in his ancient eyes.
I want to make you an offer. I'm listening.
Be my companion, my friend, perhaps. In return, I will ensure that Emma receives the finest medical care money can buy, the best schools, the best opportunities. She will want for nothing. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. You want to buy me? I want to offer you a choice. Serve me by choice rather than force, and your daughter will live like a princess. And if I refuse, his expression darkened slightly. Then you remain my prisoner, and Emma grows up wondering why her mother never came home. The cruelty of the offer was breathtaking in its simplicity. Sarah felt tears threaten for the first time since this nightmare began, but she blinked them away furiously. You son of a bitch. I have been called far worse. He moved closer, and she caught his scent, something like expensive cologne mixed with cold stone and old blood. But I am being generous, Sarah. I could simply take what I want from you and discard what remains. Instead, I offer you partnership. Partnership? Sarah laughed harshly. What kind of partnership involves threatening a child? The kind born of necessity. You see, I find myself in need of something I have not required in centuries. Genuine human companionship. Not the cowering fear of servants or the mindless devotion of thralls, but the company of an equal who chooses to stay. I will never be your equal, Sarah said firmly, and I will never stay willingly. Never is a very long time, my dear. Longer than you might imagine. Dr. Sufstock crawled, What do you mean? Lord Dracul smiled, revealing those unnaturally sharp canines. I mean, that time works differently when you have eternity to consider your options. What seems impossible today may seem merely difficult tomorrow. You're insane if you think. What I think, he interrupted smoothly, is that you will eventually realize that cooperation serves Emma's interests better than defiance serves your pride. He wasn't just talking about keeping her prisoner, he was talking about something far worse. Into what you are. The thought had occurred to me. He circled her slowly, like a predator studying prey. Imagine never having to worry about Emma's future again. Imagine having the power to protect her from every threat, to ensure her happiness for as long as she lives. Imagine having to murder innocent people to survive, Sarah countered. Imagine becoming a monster who preys on families like my own. Sacrifice is necessary for all great loves, he said philosophically. You have already sacrificed your own comfort, your own dreams, your own chance at romance and companionship. How is this so different? Be un. The words exploded from her before she could stop them. What you are, what you do, it's an abomination. His expression grew cold. Careful, Sarah. I am offering you a choice out of respect for your strength. Do not mistake that respect for weakness. She met his gaze steadily. And don't mistake my fear for submission. I've told you already, I'll never willingly become what you are. For a moment, the silence stretched between them like a blade. Then, unexpectedly, Lord Dracul laughed, a rich, genuinely amused sound that transformed his entire face. Magnificent, he murmured. Simply magnificent. Do you know how long it has been since anyone dared speak to me with such honesty? Probably not long enough, Sarah muttered. He continued laughing, moving to pour himself a glass of dark red wine from a crystal decanter. He offered her a glass, but she shook her head. You will stay for dinner, he announced, settling back into his chair. And you will tell me more about this remarkable daughter of yours? Why? Because I commanded. And because, despite your defiance, I believe you are intelligent enough to recognize that cooperation will make your circumstances more bearable. Sarah weighed her options. She could refuse, but that would likely earn her a return to the locked chamber with no opportunity to learn more about her captor or search for weaknesses. Or she could play along, gather information, and look for chances to escape. "Fine," she said, taking the offered seat, "but I want proof that Emma is safe. Proof. A phone call. Or a video message. Something to show me she's okay."
Lord Draco considered this.
"Very well. Victor can arrange for you to speak with her tomorrow evening. But Sarah," his voice carried a warning, "do not attempt to convey any information about your location or circumstances. Emma's continued well-being depends entirely on your discretion." The threat was clear, and Sarah felt her last hope of rescue crumble. Even if she found a way to contact the outside world, she couldn't risk putting Emma in danger. Dinner was served in a smaller, more intimate dining room. The meal was excellent. Fresh trout, roasted vegetables, bread that was still warm from the oven. Lord Draco proved to be a surprisingly engaging conversationalist, discussing everything from literature to medicine with obvious intelligence and education. "You studied nursing where?" he asked as she described her training. "Community college in Phoenix. I couldn't afford a 4-year program, and Emma was just a baby." Sarah found herself relaxing slightly despite the surreal circumstances. "I wanted something practical, something that would always be in demand. And you chose pediatric nursing specifically. After Emma got sick, yes. I wanted to understand her condition better, to be able to advocate for her properly." She paused, studying his face. "Why do you care about any of this?" "Because understanding you is essential to our future relationship." The casual way he spoke of their future relationship sent another chill through her. "There is no relationship. You're holding me prisoner. For now, perhaps. But I am an optimist, Sarah. I believe that given time, you will come to see the wisdom of my offer. The wisdom of becoming a monster, the wisdom of accepting power." His pale eyes seemed to glow in the candlelight. "Do you know what I was before I became what I am now? A minor nobleman's second son, destined for the priesthood because my older brother would inherit everything. I had no power, no control over my own destiny. So you sold your soul for it?" "I did what was necessary to survive, just as you are doing now." He leaned forward intently. "We are not so different, you and I. We both understand that survival requires sacrifice." Sarah shook her head. "We're nothing alike. Everything I've sacrificed has been for Emma's benefit. You sacrificed other people for your own, and yet here you sit, dining with me instead of weeping in a cell. Perhaps you understand pragmatism better than you care to admit." The accusation stung because there was truth in it. She was trying to survive, trying to find an advantage that might eventually lead to escape, but that didn't make her like him. "I'm biding my time," she said firmly. "That's not the same as giving up." "No," he agreed with another of those unsettling smiles. "It is not, which is precisely what makes you so intriguing." As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself drawn into increasingly personal conversations despite her better judgment. Lord Draco spoke of his mortal life with a mixture of nostalgia and bitterness, painting a picture of medieval Romania that was both fascinating and horrifying. He had been transformed during a Turkish siege, dying of battlefield wounds. "The hunger was overwhelming at first," he admitted, staring into his wineglass. "I fed indiscriminately, like a rabid animal. It took decades to develop control, to learn to choose my prey with discretion." "How can you speak about murdering people so casually?" Sarah asked. "How can you speak about Emma's cancer treatment so casually?" he countered. "Both are simply realities we have learned to accept. That's completely different. Both involve pain. Both involve death. Both require us to make peace with circumstances beyond our control." He set down his glass and looked at her directly. "The only difference is that I have had 4 centuries to develop perspective." Sarah felt sick, not just from his twisted logic, but from the realization that part of her, a small, traitorous part, could almost follow his reasoning. The past year of Emma's illness had taught her that survival sometimes required making terrible choices, accepting awful realities, finding strength in the darkest circumstances. "You're trying to manipulate me," she said quietly. "I am trying to help you understand that adaptation is not betrayal, that accepting your situation is not the same as abandoning your principles. My principles include not becoming a murderer. Principles include protecting Emma above all else. How is my offer incompatible with that goal?" Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the stone floor. "Because some prices are too high to pay, even for the people we love most." Lord Drackle rose as well, moving around the table toward her. "Are they, Sarah? Are you certain of that?" The predatory grace in his movement made her step backward, but there was nowhere to go. He cornered her against the wall, close enough that she could feel the supernatural cold radiating from his skin. "What if Emma's cancer returns?" he asked softly. "What if the treatments fail this time? What if you lose her despite all your love and sacrifice and determination?" "Stop it," Sarah whispered. "What if she grows up and moves away, starts her own family, sees you only on holidays and birthdays? What if you grow old, alone, forgotten, just another casualty of time and circumstance? Stop. But if you accept my gift, you could watch over her always. You could ensure her safety, her success, her happiness. You could be her guardian angel for as long as the world exists." Sarah's hand moved instinctively to the silver cross at her throat, and Lord Drackle's eyes followed the movement. His expression grew thoughtful. "A gift from Emma?" he asked. "Yes. She gave it to you for protection. She's 8 years old. She believes in guardian angels and magic," and Sarah's voice broke slightly. "And mothers who always come home. Then come home to her, Sarah, but come home with the power to keep her safe forever." The temptation in his voice was almost overwhelming. For just a moment, Sarah could see it, could imagine having supernatural strength and speed, could picture herself watching over Emma from the shadows, ensuring that no harm ever touched her precious daughter again. Then Emma's face appeared in her mind, smiling and innocent and trusting, and Sarah knew with absolute certainty that her daughter would rather lose her mother than see her become a monster. "No," she said firmly, straightening her spine. "Emma doesn't need a guardian angel. She needs her mother. The real me, not some twisted version corrupted by evil." Lord Drackle studied her for a long moment, then stepped back with something that might have been respect flickering in his ancient eyes. "Very well," he said quietly. "But the offer remains open. And Sarah, time has a way of changing even the most resolute hearts." As Victor appeared to escort her back to her chamber, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation was far from over. The Vampire King had planted seeds of doubt that would be difficult to ignore, especially during the long dark hours when thoughts of Emma's future would inevitably prey upon her mind. But for now, she had held her ground. For now, she remained herself. The question was how long she could maintain her resistance against an immortal creature who had eternity to wear down her defenses. 3 weeks into her captivity, Sarah had developed a routine that kept her sane and focused. Each morning she woke before dawn to exercise in her chamber, using modified calisthenics learned from her nursing school fitness requirements. She spent her days reading every book she could find, searching for useful information about vampire folklore, castle architecture, or anything else that might aid her escape. Evenings belonged to Lord Drackle. Their dinner conversations had become a strange ritual, part interrogation, part debate, part psychological warfare. He continued pressing his offer of transformation with subtle persistence, while she maintained her refusal with equally stubborn determination. But Sarah couldn't deny that she was learning about her captor, and knowledge was the only weapon she had. Tonight felt different, though. Victor had been more agitated than usual, and she'd heard unusual sounds throughout the castle. Doors slamming, raised voices in languages she didn't recognize, and what sounded like furniture being moved or broken. When she arrived at the dining room, Lord Drackle was pacing restlessly near the windows instead of seated at his usual place. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, his dark hair falling across his forehead and his white shirt partially unbuttoned. "You seem troubled," Sarah observed, taking her seat despite his obvious distress. "The villagers have become problematic," he said without turning around. They whisper stories about missing travelers, about lights in the castle at night. Some have begun carrying crosses and garlic, like their superstitious ancestors. Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they're finally realizing what you are. What I am has never been a secret to those who live in my shadow, but they have always understood the benefits of discretion. He turned to face her, and she was startled by the barely controlled fury in his pale eyes. Someone has been spreading tales, encouraging them to remember old fears instead of accepting new realities. One of the other caretakers? The other caretakers are no longer capable of spreading anything. No, this insurgence has a different source. A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she realized what he was implying. You think someone is coming to look for us? I think someone has been asking questions in the village below. Someone who knows enough about the old stories to make the locals nervous. Lord Dracul moved to the sideboard and poured himself a generous glass of the dark wine. Tell me, Sarah, did you mention your destination to anyone before accepting this position? Sarah's heart began to race, but she kept her expression neutral. The agency knew where we were going. That's standard procedure. The agency, yes. But what about friends? Family members, someone who might grow concerned if you failed to return on schedule? The truth was that Sarah had been deliberately vague about her plans, telling her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, only that she was taking a private nursing position in Europe. But she had made one call, a brief conversation with Dr. Jennifer Mills, Emma's oncologist, who had become something of a friend during Emma's treatment. I may have mentioned it to Emma's doctor, she admitted carefully, in case there was a medical emergency. Lord Dracul's eyes narrowed. What exactly did you tell her? Just that I was taking a temporary position in Romania. Nothing specific. Nothing specific, he repeated thoughtfully. And this doctor, she would have resources to investigate if you disappeared. Sarah's hope grew stronger. Dr. Mills was not only a brilliant physician, but also came from a wealthy family with international connections. If anyone had the means and motivation to track down a missing friend, it would be her. She might, Sarah said as casually as she could manage. Might. Lord Dracul set down his wine glass with deliberate precision. How unfortunate for everyone involved. The implied threat made Sarah's stomach clench, but before she could respond, Victor burst into the dining room without knocking, something he had never done before. My lord, he said urgently in accented English, we have a problem. Father Constantin from the village has arrived with a group of men. They are armed with crosses and blessed water, and they demand to speak with you. Sarah felt a surge of hope so powerful it made her dizzy. Someone had come. Someone was looking for the missing caretakers. Lord Dracul's expression grew coldly furious. How many men? 8, my lord. But they seem determined. Armed with more than religious artifacts, I assume. Stakes, silver blades, and what appears to be dynamite, my lord. The vampire's laugh was genuinely amused despite his anger. Dynamite? How wonderfully modern of them. Very well, Victor. Show them to the main hall. I will speak with this priest. My lord, is that wise? But it has been decades since I faced a proper vampire hunter, and I find myself curious about their methods. He turned to Sarah with a smile that chilled her blood. You will accompany me, of course. Why? Because, my dear, you are going to help me demonstrate the futility of their mission. Sarah's hope began to transform into terror as she realized what he meant. He was going to use her as a hostage, a human shield to protect himself from the hunter's weapons. I won't cooperate, she said firmly. You will do exactly as I command, or I will ensure that Emma grows up believing her mother abandoned her by choice. His voice carried absolute certainty. Victor, bring word to our contacts in Phoenix. Have them locate the child and prepare for intervention. The threat to Emma shattered Sarah's defiance like glass. Please don't hurt her, she's innocent. Then ensure that she remains safe by following my instructions precisely. Victor led them through the castle's corridors toward the main hall, and Sarah could hear voices echoing from the ancient stone chamber, men speaking in rapid Romanian, their tones urgent and determined. As they approached, she caught sight of the group through an archway. 8 men indeed, led by an elderly priest whose weathered face spoke of decades ministering to a superstitious mountain community. They wore heavy coats against the cold, and each carried a wooden cross along with more practical weapons. The youngest looked to be in his 20s, probably someone's son or nephew drawn into the danger by family obligation. The oldest was gray-haired and grim-faced, a man who had clearly seen enough of the world's darkness to believe in monsters. "Gentlemen," Lord Drackle announced as he entered the hall with Sarah at his side, Victor flanking them both, "to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Father Constantin stepped forward, his cross held prominently before him. He spoke in rapid Romanian, his voice carrying the authority of righteous anger. "The good father," Victor translated with obvious reluctance, "says that travelers have been disappearing near your lands, my lord. He demands the return of the Americans who came to work here." "And if I refuse?" Lord Drackle asked in English, his tone conversationally polite. The priest spoke again, and this time Victor looked genuinely uncomfortable as he translated. "He says the village has voted. If you do not release the missing people and leave this place forever, they will destroy the castle and everything in it." He was facing down a creature of immense supernatural power with nothing but faith and determination. "How charmingly naive," the vampire said softly. "Very well, father. You wish to see the Americans. Victor, bring our guests." Victor disappeared into the castle's depths, and Sarah's heart began to race as she wondered what condition the other caretakers would be in. When the butler returned, he was not alone. James Chen, Rebecca Williams, Maria Rodriguez, David Thompson, and Elena Petrova walked into the hall in single file, their movements oddly mechanical. They were dressed in clean clothes and appeared physically unharmed, but their eyes were blank and unfocused, like sleepwalkers moving through a dream. "As you can see," Lord Drackle announced, "your missing Americans are quite well. They have simply chosen to remain in my employ permanently." Father Constantin spoke sharply to one of the younger men who stepped forward and called out in English, "James Chen, can you hear me?" James turned toward the voice but showed no recognition, no emotion, no spark of humanity in his vacant stare. Sarah realized with growing horror that the other caretakers weren't just prisoners. They had been turned into something else entirely. Not vampires, but not human anymore either. They were thralls, their minds and wills completely enslaved to their supernatural master. "Release them," Father Constantine demanded in heavily accented English. "They are not yours to keep." "But they came to me willingly," Lord Drackle replied with mock innocence. "They signed contracts, accepted payment, and chose to remain. Who are you to interfere with their employment decisions?" The priest's eyes fell on Sarah, taking in her more alert expression and obvious distress. He spoke directly to her in English. "Are you here by choice, child?" Before Sarah could answer, she felt Lord Dracule's hand settle on her shoulder with gentle pressure that carried the threat of tremendous force. "Sarah is my honored guest," the vampire said smoothly. "She has been somewhat homesick lately, haven't you, my dear?" Sarah met the priest's eyes and made a desperate decision. If she was going to die anyway, she might as well die trying to save others. "He's holding me prisoner," she said clearly, loudly enough for all the hunters to hear. "He killed or enslaved the other caretakers. He's a vampire, just like the stories say." Jack Hugh's grip on her shoulder tightened painfully, but his smile never wavered. "Stress can cause delusions, I'm afraid. Sarah has been under considerable strain worrying about her daughter back home." The mention of Emma made the priest's expression soften with understanding. "Your child is safe," he said to Sarah in his accented English. "Dr. Jane Mills, she found us, told us about your work here. The little girl is being cared for by family friends." Sarah felt tears of relief threaten. Emma was safe. Whatever happened now, her daughter would be protected. "How touching," Lord Drackle said, his voice gaining a subtle accent that spoke of barely controlled rage. "But I'm afraid this reunion must come to an end." He raised his free hand, and Sarah felt an otherworldly power fill the air like electricity before a storm. The temperature in the hall dropped perceptibly and shadows seemed to deepen and move independently of their sources. The vampire hunters responded immediately. Father Constantin began chanting in Latin, while the other men formed a protective circle, their crosses held high and their weapons ready. The youngest hunter, a man barely older than James had been, pulled what looked like a hand grenade from his coat. "Dynamite, you said?" Lord Dracul asked Victor with amusement. How wonderfully apocalyptic. What followed was chaos. The vampire moved with inhuman speed, crossing the hall in a blur of motion that left Sarah stumbling backward without his supporting grip. One of the hunters screamed as razor-sharp claws opened his throat, while another fired a crossbow bolt that shattered harmlessly against the stone wall where his target had been standing a split second before. But the hunters were not helpless. Father Constantin's Latin chanting seemed to cause Lord Dracul genuine discomfort, forcing him to avoid the priest's immediate vicinity. Holy water splashed across the vampire's face, eliciting a hiss of pain and fury, and when one of the silver blades managed to graze his arm, black blood flowed from the wound. Sarah found herself pressed against the wall, trying to stay out of the way of supernatural violence while looking for an opportunity to help. The enslaved caretakers stood motionlessly in the center of the chaos, their blank eyes reflecting the firelight like mirrors. The tide of battle turned when the youngest hunter made a desperate gamble. Instead of trying to target the nearly untouchable vampire, he threw his explosive device toward the ancient fireplace where massive wooden beams supported the ceiling. The explosion was deafening. Stone and timber crashed down in a thunderous cascade, and flames began licking at the centuries-old tapestries. In the confusion, Sarah saw her chance. She grabbed the iron poker from the ruined fireplace and moved toward Victor, who was trying to shepherd the thrall caretakers to safety. "Sarah, no!" Lord Dracul's voice carried absolute command, the supernatural compulsion that had enslaved the others. But Sarah had spent weeks building up resistance to his mental influence, and her desperate love for Emma provided a shield stronger than any cross or holy water. She drove the iron poker deep into Victor's chest, and the ancient servant crumpled with a sound like escaping steam. The destruction of his chief lieutenant sent Lord Dracul into a rage that transcended rational thought. He abandoned his tactical approach and launched himself directly at the group of hunters, fangs bared and claws extended like daggers. Father Constantin stepped forward to meet him, cross blazing with what seemed like actual light, and the collision between vampire and priest shook the entire castle. What happened next would be debated for years among the survivors. Some claimed the priest's faith literally burned the vampire to ash. Others insisted that falling timber from the damaged ceiling had pinned the creature until the flames consumed him. Sarah, closest to the supernatural battle, saw something different entirely. In the moment before Lord Dracul struck the priest down, she saw something flicker in the vampire's ancient eyes. Not just rage or hunger, but a kind of weary relief. As if, after 4 centuries of unnatural existence, he welcomed the chance to finally rest. The fire spread quickly through the ancient castle, consuming tapestries, books, and timber that had stood for hundreds of years. The surviving hunters gathered the freed caretakers and rushed toward the main entrance, but Sarah hesitated, looking back at the blazing hall where her captor had fallen. "Come, child," Father Constantin called to her. "There is nothing left here for the living," but Sarah could have sworn she heard something in the crackling flames. A voice speaking words meant for her alone. "Tell Emma. Tell her that even monsters can learn to love." Then the ceiling collapsed entirely and Sarah ran. The journey down the mountain was a blur of smoke, tears, and overwhelming relief. The other caretakers gradually regained their awareness as they put distance between themselves and the castle, though none of them retained clear memories of their time as thralls. James kept asking what had happened to the nice old gentleman they were supposed to be caring for, while Rebecca worried about whether they would still be paid for their work. Only Elena seemed to truly understand what they had escaped. She walked beside Sarah in thoughtful silence, occasionally murmuring what sounded like prayers in Romanian. "You knew, didn't you?" Sarah finally asked as they reached the village. "You knew what we were walking into, Elena nodded slowly. "My grandmother told me stories. But the money, My family needed the money. I thought perhaps the stories were just superstition. But you came anyway, as did you." Elena studied Sarah's face in the pre-dawn light. "Though I think your reasons for staying were different from mine for coming." Sarah thought about Emma, probably waking up in Phoenix wondering why her mother hadn't called in days. She thought about Dr. Mills, who had apparently moved heaven and earth to organize a rescue mission. She thought about the terror and temptation she had faced in the vampire's castle, and the strength she had found in her love for her daughter. "Maybe," she said quietly, "but we all came home." The media attention was inevitable but mercifully brief. The official story was a tragic fire at a remote castle where several American caregivers had been working. The Romanian authorities found charred remains that were identified as the estate owner and his staff, while the survivors suffered from smoke inhalation and trauma-induced memory loss. Sarah gave carefully scripted interviews about the accident, describing their employer as a reclusive, elderly gentleman who had unfortunately perished in the blaze. She never mentioned vampires or supernatural encounters, and the other caretakers' spotty memories supported the official narrative. 3 months later, Sarah sat in Emma's hospital room during a routine follow-up appointment, watching her daughter charm the nursing staff with her endless questions about medical equipment. Dr. Mills knocked on the doorframe and entered with Emma's test results. "Everything looks perfect," the oncologist announced, causing both Sarah and Emma to break into relieved smiles. "No signs of recurrence, excellent blood work, and she's growing like a weed." "Dr. Mills," Emma said seriously, "Mom told me you helped find her when she got lost in Romania. Thank you for bringing her home." The doctor's expression softened as she looked at the little girl. "Your mom is very special, Emma. I think she would have found her way home no matter what." Later, as they walked to the car, Emma slipped her small hand into Sarah's and looked up at her with those bright, curious eyes. "Mom, when you were lost, were you scared?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Yes, sweetheart, I was very scared. But you knew I was waiting for you, right? You knew you had to come home?" "I knew," Sarah said, squeezing her daughter's hand. "No matter what happened, I knew I had to come home to you." Emma nodded solemnly, as if this confirmed something important in her 8-year-old understanding of the world. "That's because you're my mom. Moms always come home." That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat on her small apartment balcony and looked up at the stars. Somewhere in the distance, she could swear she heard the faint sound of music, a haunting melody played on what might have been a harpsichord. But when she listened more carefully, there was only the normal sounds of the city at night. She touched the silver cross at her throat, the one Emma had given her for protection. It had protected her in the end. Not from supernatural evil, but from the temptation to sacrifice her humanity for power. Her daughter had been right about mothers always coming home, but some journeys changed you in ways that could never be undone. Sarah had faced a monster and discovered that the greatest weapon against darkness wasn't holy water or silver blades, but the unshakable love of a mother for her child. It was a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life, along with the memory of pale eyes that had learned too late what love really meant. In the months that followed, Sarah received a few letters forwarded through the caretaking agency. They bore no return address and were written in an elegant script that seemed familiar but impossible. Each contained only a single sentence: "Bet Emma is well protected." Sarah never responded to these messages, but she kept them in a small box with Emma's school photos and medical records. Sometimes, late at night, she wondered if some monsters really could learn to love, and if love could transcend even death itself. But mostly she focused on the future. Emma's future, their future together, because in the end, that was all that mattered. All caretakers fell in the Vampire King's castle, but a single mom came with unshakable nerve.